Okay, now we continue our webinar on women's role in handling the global pandemic with the second round presentation from speakers. For the first speaker, I am pleased to present Dr. Ella Prihatini. She is currently a lecturer at the International Relations Department, Bina Nusantara University, Indonesia. She has got Ph.D. from University of Western Australia, Perth, and her research deals with issues in women political representation. She has published articles in peer-reviewed journals such as Politics, Gender, Parliament Affairs, Contemporary Politics, and Women's Studies International Forum. And in September 2019, Ella was listed by the Australian newspaper as Australia's top 40 researchers who are less than 10 years into their careers. Dr. Ella, thank you for joining with us. I hand it over to you.
Thank you for the opportunity, Ibu Sartika. Do you wish me to deliver the speech in Bahasa or in English?
Well, it's up to you. Maybe in English because we have audience from overseas.
Right.
If
Okay.
you convenience, please.
Okay. Selamat siang. Good day, everyone. My name is Ella Prihatini, and I'm here representing the BINUS University, Bina Nusantara University. So in this presentation, I'd like to point it out the fact that representation matters. What we've seen so far is that women are continuing are being underrepresented in various aspects, including as the response teams and the plans itself to overcome this pandemic. Maybe before I turn to slide number 2, I just want to re-highlight the fact that representation matters for 3 different meanings. Marian Sauer in 2000 discussed about there are 3 types of representation that we need to always be clear about because there are 3 different meanings. The first one is the representation of interest, ideas, values, perspectives, and experiences. The second one is the representativeness of which includes effects on aspirations and on status of group. And thirdly is the equal right to represent, to participate in decision making, and to increase pool of talent. So need to be highlighted in this presentation is that this right for women to participate in public life on an equal basis with men is regulated in the convention that we all know, Article 7, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So the rights to participate does not oblige women to make a difference to public life, but it's simply allowing women to be part of the decision-making processes. Maybe the next slide. Right, as been discussed by other presenters before me, this current pandemic, COVID-19, has multiple facets, including the gendered consequences. The gender consequences is very clear. We don't need to provide any evidence such as the scale and the magnitude of the consequences, but just to highlight a few. Women aged 25 to 34 globally are 25% more likely than men to live in extreme poverty because of this pandemic. Second of all, female healthcare workers infected more than male workers. The case here is Spain and Italy, where in Spain you have 72% of those healthcare workers are female who got infected, while only 28% of male being infected. In Italy, the number is 66% versus 34%. And then let's move forward to the gender-based violence. In France, the reports of gender-based in domestic violence increased by 30% since the lockdown. We do agree the fact that it's getting more fragile for women to survive under these circumstances. And also unpaid care work, obviously. Before the COVID-19, we know that women do more unpaid care work around the house or to support other family members. But because of this COVID pandemic, we are experiencing more unpaid care works for women compared to men, despite the fact that they are all working from home, right? So these four gender consequences are mainly what we're very concerned about. But also in this presentation, I'd like to raise the fact that we also need to be part of the decision-making process because we know that the impact is very close to our heart. We experience it day to day. And then the third slide, please. The third slide is, before I go to this section, I just like to raise you a paper, recently published paper in Politics and Gender about gender and leadership during COVID-19. So the authors of this this paper argues that they argue that before the pandemic, media coverage on female leaders are regularly focusing on, the femininity or the child or childless women as leaders and how they portray this femininity, and to some degree, sometimes often making women in a less preferred positions. But after seeing that different female leaders globally has been performing really well compared to the male leaders, now the media kind of shift their perspectives or their tone in terms of women's femininity as a leader. So we might gonna see now femininity is a good point, even to raise childless leaders such as Merkel, suggesting that she's a scientist, but also she can be very nurturing leader because she's a woman. So that becomes a good side of being a woman nowadays, to become leaders in some countries who perform really well. But that might not be relevant in some areas, such as we've seen in Indonesia. So what's missing? What's missing here is that the response teams. In this slide page number 3, there's a study by CARE. They surveyed 30 countries, right, who established national level committees to respond COVID-19. And the results suggest that there's only one out of 30 countries surveyed that has more women sitting in the committee. There's only one country, and that is Canada. The others have less than 50%, and sometimes is very, very low, less than 10%. So it seems like this is like, reflecting how women fare in parliament, how women fare in executive branch, etc. But this is no more acceptable, because we've seen that almost 75% had fewer than 1/3 of female membership. Why women are being excluded in this response teams, which is very, very inappropriate in these terms and in this experience of pandemic. So on average, the CARE survey found that women only made up 34% of all the committees, which is still less than the number that we would expect, which is parity or near parity. The fourth page here is a showcase of the United States, please. Page 4. So as we can see here, as a case study, America, or the United States, provides us an excellent disclosure or display of how gendered these response teams can be, right? So women works as health workers for 80% of the share, right? 80%, so that means 4 out of 5 of healthcare workers are female, right? But when it comes to leadership positions, then we will see the ratio sharply reduced to 11%, roughly, and then even more smaller portion for women in the White House Coronavirus Task Force, less than 9%. Why is this the case? Various reasons behind this proportion, but this is just another example, a prime example of how the gender gap is very staggering in terms of response teams. And we don't want to see that in the future. Why? Let's go to slide 5, please. Right. There's a study also coming just recently about by Cosme and colleagues. about how women's leadership had different kind of like interesting public health outcomes. So the paper basically argues that those countries with female leadership tend to have lesser death per capita and lesser days with death, right? So the left side is suggesting that the blue is women and the red is men leaders, right? So it's been logged, and then see the difference between these two types of leaderships. So if women are performing really well in terms of handling this public health crisis, then why should we let their representation very, very low in the response teams? We need to also acknowledge that women also are capable of, participating in decision making, and also lots of epidemiologists are female. That's what we need to pursue in this follow-up policies. And lastly, my last slide will be about highlighting the fact how response plans also having a very troubling gender gaps, right? So this is going to be my last slide. So I just want to refocus on this part because this is what we're dealing with day by day. The response plans, right? So we've seen that gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health, as discussed by my previous speakers, these are two main subjects or topics that are very close to women's interests, right? That we've seen from the core survey is that about 54% of countries surveyed had no action on gender-based violence. So they had no idea what to do with it. They have no plans on what to do with it. Despite clear evidence suggesting that the impact of this crisis are partly, including this GB fee. So without any plans to overcome this, question marks, be very raised here, really, like, why don't we have any plans about this? Women being killed by, their spouse, or, someone lives in the same house, and then, violence become really brutal. They don't have plan. Almost slightly above 50% of that. And also, countries that have women leadership, based on this survey, suggesting that the response is more representatives, considering the effects on women and girls. So we can see that having women in leadership is key, is one of the important points that we need to raise because of these facts. So on average, the higher the countries score on the index of having a female leadership, the more likely it was to craft a gendered response. I'll leave that presentation there for further discussion, and I thank you so much for the opportunity and for listening to this presentation. Thank you so much, Ibu Kartika, for the opportunity. Thank you.
The effect of this pandemic even worse, because women typically many of us are women, we experience by ourselves that we juggle between earning and caring, So in